Hey everybody, it's Rajesh here.
And Tane here.
Welcome to our podcast, Baskets of Knowledge, Chats with a Difference. In our podcast, we invite guests from around the country and around the world to talk about how they got to where they're at the moment. It's about a journey, it's about an experience, it's about their life. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Baskets of Knowledge. As always, we appreciate you listening in. And as always, we try and bring you some people that we think are pretty amazing. Tanya, how have you been since we last spoke?
I've been good. Yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks. We had Relay for Life last week around the clock tower, which was a massive effort. And yeah, it's just been a busy couple of weeks, but very rewarding to do something like the Relay for Life.
Yeah, awesome. And while you were running around for whatever 59 kilometers that you did, I think it was, or 60 kilometers, what piece of knowledge did you put into your mind as you were doing that crazy awesomeness?
I think something I've reflected on in the last couple of weeks, I seen it on a post, and it was the saying that reputation is what people think you are and character is what you are. And I think it was quite a good understanding to reflect on. You can have all these things on your CV, or you could have done all these things that you've been involved with, but people can see right through that if you don't have the character to back that up. And so when you go into new roles, or you go into something like coaching for me, and it's all about your character that really determines the relationships you hold with people. So reflecting on that, I've really had to think deep about the roles I'm taking, but also that building the CV is just one part of, what happens in your lifelong career.
Yeah, I'm noticing a bit of a trend here, Tanya, with over the last few podcasts and the last few learnings, they all link towards CV versus reality. Because I think there's a shift that happens when you go, hey, we've all been told to work towards our CV, but actually there's more to a piece of paper than the titles. So it's pretty awesome learning over your 60 kilometers of running and walking and all that fun stuff. Yeah, and I guess my learning is similar to yours in that you have all these crazy cool titles, but unless you have honor integrity with whatever you do, those titles mean nothing. And it's interesting because as I've been doing this, I'm back at work this week here, and all these new people that have started these new roles, they have all these crazy cool titles. That's when you speak to other people about them, the integrity is pretty shot. So you're like, so it's interesting how your reputation precedes your actual title. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll touch through it as we go through today's podcast. As always, our listeners, Tanya and I can keep talking forever and ever, but hey, it's not about Tanya and myself. It is about our guests. And as always, we scour the country and the world to find some people that we think are pretty amazing. And like I said at the start, and I always say this, we think everyone is amazing. We're just lucky to have people jump onto the podcast to have a chat about their story. And this week, we're very lucky and very privileged to have Gavin joining us on our podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Gavin.
Hey, Rajesh and Tane. Great to be on.
Fantastic. Thank you. Gavin, for our listeners who don't know anything about you, do you just want to tell us who you are, where you are, and what you're doing, and then we'll get into your story?
Who I am, where I am, and what am I doing?
Yeah.
It's a good one. I should probably prepare a soundbite for this. But hi, kia ora, my name is Gavin. I'm from Taranaki as well. Like we were just talking about beforehand, it seems to be a lot of people from here. But I'm also from a few other places. I was born in New England. I'm from Boston area in Massachusetts. From a mother who's Italian American and a dad who's from Taranaki in Eltham, actually. And they met in India. And we lived there for a bit. And then I ended up moving to Chile in South America in the Atacama Desert. Lived there for 2.5 years before moving back to the States for about half a year to a different spot called Connecticut. And then moving to Taranaki in 2011. Where I spent the rest of intermediate and high school before going down to Dunedin, which is how I know Prajesh. And Prajesh swung some things and has some influence in my hall choice, which we can get into later. Then we ended up getting into medical school, did honors last year, which I'm happy to talk about. And now I'm up in Christchurch doing 4th year medicine. What am I all about? I like having fun, and I like getting really deep into adventures and thinking about stuff a bit more probably than is normal for non-tangential conversations.
Brilliant. I love it. That's a great summary of who you are at the moment. And as you said before, Gavin, I've always been interested in I met you when you were in high school all those years ago, but I've been interested in the things that you do, and we'll talk about that in today's podcast. But before we even touch about that, let's talk about your upbringing. You've had a pretty crazy upbringing. That's in terms of living in all these different places here. How was that, as you step back and look at it now, how has that influenced you as a person as you are now doing, I guess, working in, starting to become a doctor, where you're coming across all these different cultures and different kinds of people? What has the upbringing been like for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been a bit of a journey, and I think I'm still very much on that journey of uncovering and reflecting and understanding myself. But yeah, over the years, you definitely start to notice like certain things that it's like, wow, that's probably actually why I'm this way, and not another way. I'd say like for one is definitely like I've always sort of been on the border between different groups. Like I've always kind of been I'm always kind of growing up been like a foreigner no matter where I go. You know, I go to the States and I'm a Kiwi. I come here and I'm American accent gets put on there. And so I think like you start to identify a lot with people that are like kind of not part of the major group that are in any given location, which kind of when it comes to out groups and in groups makes, if your in group is the out group, that's kind of a fun way to have things go about different things on that sort of thing. With medicine, I mean, we haven't been seeing a whole lot of patients. I've been on the older person's health ward for so far, but yeah, it's certainly been cool getting to know with a bunch of different people. And I feel like probably the more attributable thing there is just comfortableness with different cultures and things like that. And the fact that that's led me to do different activities, like hitchhiking, for instance. I've done quite a bit of hitchhiking all around New Zealand, and I've got a few stories in that sort of way. And when you sit down and just chat with someone in their car who just wants to chat with you, and they're completely from a random walk of life that you otherwise would never have come into, that kind of gets you into a position where you have to like connect with people, and you realize you can connect with people because, you know, we're just people on this earth all trying to struggle through life and have some happiness. So there's some of that when people are sick as well in the hospital, just the same people.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, you know, when you, it's really quite funny you say that, because I experienced the same thing as an Indian ethnicity growing up in Africa, growing up in a world that was post-apartheid, because my dad grew up in an apartheid world. So basically it was, hey, if you're black, this is where you go. If you're white, this is where you go. If you are brown, which is what I am, and anything. So in Africa, it was black, white, and brown, because brown community of colored people as well, who were a mix of black and white. So for them, it is clearly defined. If you're this color or this race, what you're going to do. And then I grew up post that there. So it's interesting to live in a world like that, where you identify as Zimbabwean, but you actually look Indian. And then coming over to New Zealand, where you are defined by what you look. People define you straight away by what you look like. When you go, hey, I'm from Africa. Oh, but you look Indian. And you're like, oh yeah, but how do you identify yourself? Where's home for you? And then I went to India for the first time as an adult a few years ago, and I was like, oh, everyone here looks the same as me, but I'm not one of them. So who do I identify myself as? So as you say, I stick with more people that are outer, but sometimes at the in group. So it's a crazy mind thing. And as the world becomes more and more global, that is becoming more and more real for lots of people. Where you go, right? Which group to identify as? Which is why when you're filling out those census forms, you go, actually, what do I actually tick? What box do I tick? It's so crazy, right? It's such a crazy thing. Let's talk about your time living in the desert. What was that like? What took you and your family to the desert of Chiles?
Well, there's not a lot of rain, I'll tell you that. I think we lived there for 2.5 years and it rained twice. And when I say rain, I mean it kind of like misted down. One of those 2 times it wasn't enough to make puddles, and the other time it did. And of course, both times school was closed completely because there was a lot of concerned parents that would ring in being like, oh my God, is my baby okay? Yeah, no quiero que está algo malo pasa, algo, you know, that sort of like, yeah, really worried about the rain sort of thing. But it's fair enough because like the houses there aren't built for it. You know, they'll have like roofs and stuff which don't have things there. They put caution tape around. We got there because of my dad's work. Yeah, it was just, we were always planning on moving to New Zealand, and it was around the time of the GFC. There was a bunch of things happening, and it just ended up being like a fairly non-inconvenient time to just move to the other side of the world because we were already doing it anyway. And they thought, you know what? And my mother had spent some time in Honduras, and actually the bike, if you see there, but the bike that I currently use to commute around the city of Christchurch is the same bike that my mother rode around with my dad on back before I was born, when they biked South America together.
Oh wow.
Just kind of a bit of a nostalgic piece. So yeah, they had a bit of familiarity with South America, and they just thought, well, why don't we stop there for a year? And then of course it ends up being 2.5 years because planning fallacy is always a thing.
100%, exactly. Oh wow. What is it like for you, you and your sister, growing up in that in a world that was so different to the Western world? Because you were in the States before you moved to Chile, and I guess that's a whole different, as you said before, the cultural differences are just so different, so immense.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of differences just because like you're different age, right? Like how do
Yeah,
you compare even just being in
totally.
Taranaki, like when you're 4 years old versus being in Dunedin when you're 21? Like there's a lot of
100%.
things there. Because yeah, what ages were you when you lived in Zimbabwe
I
and when you lived in South Africa?
yeah,
And like
yeah, I lived in Zimbabwe from I was born till I was age of 18, and then from 18
okay,
to 20, 21 I was in South Africa. Then and when I turned 22, I came to New Zealand.
oh yeah.
So, and now when I go back to Africa as an adult, it's very a different experience to when you were there as a young person. Because as you say,
Mm,
it's a different stage of your life with different expectations and different priorities and different things.
yeah, for sure. What about you, Tane? Have you, yeah, did you feel like there's like significant differences having moved between Dunedin and Taranaki?
Yes and no. Like I think the cultural differences was probably the biggest shock in coming down from Taranaki, coming down to Dunedin was a change for sure. But I think because
Like
I
the
had
student
had
culture,
part
you
of,
mean?
yeah, the student culture, so not so much like ethnic differences as per se, but more of just how I navigate myself in a student-centered environment compared to Taranaki, which is a lot more spread out, you would say as well. A big region with not so many people, but yet it feels like a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I sat in on like one of those transport like advisory things they're trying to get student input on, and apparently North Dunedin's so compact that it has the highest proportion of trips that are done by walking and biking of potentially the whole country is just in North Dunedin as a suburb, because everyone's just constantly going in between its little connections, which is super cool. You wouldn't have thought North Dunedin was like a well-designed city in that sort of way, but apparently it works.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, right? You've got your population. People want to walk.
Mm.
Happy days. It's all good. It's such a crazy. The way it works is so ridiculously crazy. Um, I want to ask you a question, Gavin. So you're in med school now. When I met you all those years ago, was med school your driver? What is the driver for you to try and get into med school? If you can remember, was there anything specific, or we just, hey, this is what I want to do with my life?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm still considering it at the moment. I'm still like not 100% on like whether a traditional clinical career is the thing I'm looking at. But I've been very interested in medicine. When I met you at that point, um, I think so over the previous summer, the summer between year 12 and year 13, I attended this Rotary Science and Technology Forum up in Auckland. And that was super cool. It was like 2 weeks up in Auckland over summer, where it was like being a uni student without any of the like pressure put on you or any of the actual things. You just basically got to hang out with people from all over the
Yeah,
country who are super interested in stuff, and they like organized a hall for you, and you had all that like a week vibe for like 2 weeks before you were even like finished year 13. So they promoted a lot of science stuff, and I kind of really like realized that like a lot of the science stuff I'm really into. But I've also always been interested in like kind of the human element of it, like being able to apply it to people. And I guess having grown up in different countries, the kind of being able to be a translator, who can like communicate stuff to people that is actually useful. And it's always seemed like doctors are people that know a lot of things. So I kind of like had a drive to be one of those people that can help people and know a lot of things in that sort of way. Um, and so yeah, got in. It was a bit of a bit of a challenge in first year and things, but it was also a bit of a game. Like there's a lot of people there and a lot of fun, and yeah, I've enjoyed it as I've come through. Um, but yeah, definitely got some considerations to do, and there's definitely like a lot of things to think about in terms of the world.
yeah, I love that because a lot of people say I'm going to be a doctor and that's it, but a lot of people that I know, actually one of my very good friends, he did med school and he finished up med school and he always wanted to give back to the community, and he
Mm.
finished up med school. He worked for a little bit and he said, I want to do something that's just so random. So he then became a barista. Became a barista. He's like, I'm going to just become a
Oh, I
barista.
think I read about this guy. He
Yeah,
was he in the newspaper in Taranaki?
he was from Taranaki. Yeah, he's from Taranaki. So
Yeah.
his name is Dave Grant, and he did that. And I was like, Dave, what are you doing? Like everyone's gonna be like, what are you up to? And he's like, no, this is what I really
Yeah.
need to do. I want to do this. And he went and he did it. And it said it just gave him a whole different perception of life, and because he wanted to have the connection with community. And when you are a barista, you're just going to see everybody, right? Because people just see you as a barista, they don't see you. So obviously he didn't have his doctor, he didn't have his label, everything was just David the barista. But meanwhile he was a medical profession. And he just wanted to do that because he didn't know what he wanted to do, and that's something that he just gave it a crack. Did that for a couple of years, and now he's gone back into med school, but into medical program with a whole different appreciation. But what I like about you, Gavin, is, and why I'm interested in what you do, is because you spoke about the translating, and one of the cool things that you've done and I've seen is your videos that you have gotten into. And let's talk about that there, because that's basically science communication, and the stuff that you produce is really, really quite cool. Because I remember you sent me a video one year. I said to you, hey, Gavin, send me some stuff, and you sent me this video, which till this day is probably the best video I've ever received from a student. It was so well done. Was there something that, as you started going to, I'm being honest, was there something that you picked up while you were at university, or was it something you've always been interested in doing with the whole, because as technology gets better and better or easier to access, where did they come from?
Yeah, so I'd say it's kind of three things. Firstly, it's kind of growing up watching people like Michael Stevens, Vsauce, Kurzgesagt, and other kind of science communication things, and just learning a lot from them. Like I've done a lot of studying in my life, but it would still probably be the honest assessment to say that I've learned more from sort of things like YouTube and books than I have from formal classes. Because there's just so much of that out there if you have an ability to find the kind of high quality resources. And then the second bit is just having gained a lot from that myself in terms of practical stuff going through uni, not having any older siblings or older cousins that have kind of gone through this similar stuff. My parents went to uni, but it was very different, long time ago, different context and things. So yeah, just having that sort of thing that people have explained, things going through. There's people online who've done some with study tips and things. There's a guy, Ali Abdal, who's done a whole lot, as well as to add on to those previous people like Hank Green and Michael Stevens. The crash course videos and stuff, they're always so good. And then just wanting, realizing that I had knowledge about a thing, and then through things like tutoring and stuff, people hitting me up and being like, hey, can you explain this thing? Can you explain this thing? And realizing that actually it's a bit inefficient to have the way that this knowledge that everyone wants to know be coming from kind of trickle down sources. It's inequitable in a way, but it's really just inefficient and doesn't need to be happening. Somebody should just stand in front of a camera and talk about it for a bit. And then I realized that I need to stop thinking that and actually do it, which is always a bit of a problem. You can have lots of ideas, but then actually implementing them is another thing. And that's still not something I've solved. I've still come up with 10 more ideas than I implement at any given point. But I managed to sit myself down with a couple of those and actually do it. And people have some pretty good things to say, and so they're useful.
Yeah, no, I like them because they're just real. Sometimes we have people that come along and do these courses here and these programs, and they're not real. They're very markety. But I like yours because they're just, hey, this is it. This is what it's all about, which is really cool. And how do you find time to do that in all your other busyness? Because your videos are not just a 5-minute job. They're really well done, and you've obviously got your study going on, and all the other crazy cool things that you do. How do you find balancing that?
Yeah, for sure. I just kind of want to go back to the real thing and stuff like that, because it's an interesting point, right? Because I appreciate and I really aspire to be someone who is authentic and someone who is real in things, but I think it's also worth putting a warning note on some of those videos, and that it still is a YouTube video. It still is a portrayal of something, and not the full context of what's going on. And that oftentimes the questions I might be answering about this is how the course works or whatever, that is very practically useful information for people that have already decided that this is a thing they want to do. They want to do medicine. They just want to understand how some of this stuff works, and let's make an entertaining video so we can see my life as I've gone through, because it's also another point is kind of me being able to reflect on stuff. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's an accurate representation of what the day-to-day life is and things like that. It's a little bit better with something like the 1 second every day videos that I've done, where I've tried to a little bit, at least it's a highlight, but it's only a daily highlight, so at least you have to see each day, and you can kind of tell a certain 2-week periods in the year and stuff where I've kind of had no life because I've been studying. There's not a whole lot of pictures up on mountains or anything they're coming through, but even those it's very much still a highlight reel and stuff. And I think it's important to be the question you want to ask, it's important to try to ask it and get a representative answer. And I think those YouTube videos achieved a lot of the goals I was trying to have and are very useful to a lot of people, but I don't think that they answer every single question that is there. And I don't want, I guess I don't want people making major life decisions off of the fact that some guy had a lot of fun and he made a YouTube video about it. I've had some messages in being like, "Oh, you convinced me to come down to Otago, and you like you made it look a lot of fun," or I was unsure, about, like, one person moved over from Australia and stuff, and I don't think I was the person necessarily that like tipped them over. They probably would have otherwise. But I would like to make sure that people realize that you can get a lot of fun out of a year and put it into a good YouTube video and have it still be informative and have nothing in there be like untrue without it necessarily being like the reality of like everything going on there.
And I guess what I like about that is it's because it's another resource, so you're making a decision. You have all the resources available, so they might go to your videos, they might go to someone else's videos, they might go to websites, they might look at books, whatever, but it's just a resource for people to use. It is crazy though if someone just uses your one video to make a decision. And it's, if anybody does that, to choose one piece of information, make a decision, and if it doesn't work out, then you go, okay, cool. Who's actually at fault here? Is it the person that provided the video or the person that watched the video? So and that's with anything in life, right? It's a bit like our podcast as well. We do this podcast here. It's an 1 hour podcast of a snippet of someone's life at this point in time. And if we do this podcast in a year's time, we'll be very different. You'll be very different. We'll have a different conversation. So it's just a reminder, but I guess the cool thing though is that we do this, a bit like us. We were not
yeah,
sure
for sure.
If we should do this podcast or not, and we just started doing it. And for us, it's been fantastic because we have all these crazy ideas. Ideas are just ideas until they become real, right? And as you said, every time you have an idea, the two of us come with all these crazy ideas all the time. But how many do we implement? Probably one or two of those ideas. But oh well, it is what it is.
That's awesome. If you implement one or two ideas every so often, like, you're doing well. You're killing the game.
Yeah. That's right, exactly. So it's always fun to see that. But it's also fun to see It's also great to see that lots of people that I work with know get defined by this particular program that they're doing. So I'm going to university this year. I'm going to university this year. I'm studying this year, and they forget that that's just one part of their life. I like to describe people. I like to describe people's.
I mean, medicine probably more so than most.
100%, exactly, 100%, exactly. Medicine, law, all the professional programs. People are like, oh, this is what I'm doing. But the way I describe when I talk to young people these days is like, hey, think about an orchestra. An orchestra has tons and tons of instruments in there, and they help deal with different things. And your life is an orchestra. And if one part of that orchestra is out of kilter, then everything goes out of kilter. So you've got to manage them all, because we find with health life first, specifically, the orchestra goes out the window. Because it's the focus is solely on the conductor as opposed to trying to worry about the bassoon and all that kind of stuff there. So I just like to talk about that. And I love how you do that in your life with whatever you do. Well, let's come back to Taranaki. So in Taranaki, med school is an option for you. What made you choose? Well, med school was the goal at that point in time. At that point, why you had this amazing experience at Auckland, and Tane had the same experience at Otago, which is quite interesting, because you had your experience at Auckland University, Tane had his at Otago, and that's what made him decide what he wanted to do as well. Why did you choose to come down south? I mean, you have a choice of going up north, down south, and I'm guessing, are you a US citizen or are you a New Zealand citizen, or what's your?
Yeah. So my dad's Kiwi, so I've been a citizen since I was born. But I've also lived here for 12 years. So I'm Kiwi as bro.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because was there an option to go to North America for pre-med?
Yeah, there definitely was, and it was definitely like a thought for a bit. And I guess so there's a few things. So there's just one, the friction, like you have to apply for the SATs and things like that. But that alone wouldn't have stopped. And another one was the cost. That's probably a major one. You're just paying sort of like triple the cost, or more, maybe quadruple the cost to go to some of these US universities and things. Significantly more if I didn't get the same scholarships that I got in New Zealand. But the other one was just that I didn't really have a desire. I feel like a few of my friends that were going overseas were going over because they wanted to have an overseas experience. They'd never left Taranaki, or they hadn't been there and things. And I guess like I was just really excited, coming out of that Rotary experience and for some of the other stuff I'd done. It's like, oh, the South Island's a new thing. People are hyped about Dunedin. I've been down to Dunedin. I went and visited it from one of my friends that I had down there, and I just got really good vibes from it. And so it was like, you know what, like I don't actually need to be overseas. I've been overseas, and that was super cool. So yeah, who knows what it would have been like if Gavin had gone to UC Berkeley or something. But yeah, Otago was pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, maybe in a parallel universe, you are going to UC Berkeley. Who knows? We talk about parallel universes
Yeah.
and different quantum time zones, right? We could get down that deep rabbit hole. And so you come
For
down to
sure.
Otago, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I want to come back to what you spoke about before, your hitchhike. Tell us about that. So obviously, let's go. When was the
Oh,
first
it's the
time
best way to get around.
what is the first time you started hitchhiking, if you can remember that? And what
So,
did you feel like?
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely started hitchhiking. So I get it from my dad, right? My dad's a bit of a legend. He's been around. He's done plenty of hitchhiking in New Zealand, but he's also hitchhiked through Japan, back after he finished his engineering degree. And yeah, went all around there. He knew two phrases. That was always his thing. He knew, where are you going? Which is Doke Ekimasu or something like that. I'm sure someone will tell me I'm butchering, but it's close enough. And then, they'd say something, which you didn't understand. And then he'd take the map out and he'd point to where he wanted to go. And then he'd look at them, and then they would either like nod yes and like be like emotion reading. You could see whether it was affirmative or negative, and if it was affirmative, you get in the car. If it was negative, he wouldn't. And then once he was in the car, he knew how to say like, I'm from New Zealand, I'm an engineer, which are two very positive traits, for and not necessarily so correlated. New Zealanders for sure correlated with it. It's just rare to find a New Zealander overseas, just because there's so few of us. But then engineer, prestigious, sort of thing and stuff. And that would be, they'd be good. And then, then he'd be away, and he got all around Japan doing this sort of thing. And he loved it. But he always said New Zealand's the best country to do it in. And so even when we were little, we'd be going on hikes and stuff, and we'd be driving to one point and then hiking out a different spot, and then like hitchhiking back to the car, around different points in Taranaki. And then I started realizing that like before I had my driver's license, before I could, get between the place between Spotswood and Owakura is actually probably one of the best routes in the entire country, because it's just one straight road. There's like basically no turnoff, so everyone's going between. It's like fairly wealthy areas, so like people aren't too afraid of you. And I'm a young person, always make sure to have a big smile and things, be very clean, and you do well with that sort of stuff. And then over the years, it just kind of built up. And then I ended up I did like 12 exams in year 13. And my last one was like economics in the last slot of the entire NCQA timetable. And then once that finished, I went straight home, packed my bags. And the next day, me and my best friend, Ethan, we went and had like a big hitchhiking adventure around the North Island. So for 2 weeks, we went from Taranaki up to Auckland, up to the top of Cape Reinga. We just were like, what if we keep going all the way, get up there? And then came back around, went to Whakatane, ended up going to a school ball at Whakatane. We like hitchhiked with our tuxes and things, from one of the people I knew from Rotary and stuff. We're kind of I knew a bunch of people from Rotary, and I'd also, I got the Thai embassy to pay for me to go to Thailand like a couple of years previously, and a similar thing with a sponsored trip to China as well. So I kind of have like these different groups of people that I knew around the country, who kind of were all like, yeah, come around. And here's the secret, by the way. It's like people love when you visit them, because most people don't come out and visit you. Like when I'm in Taranaki, I'm always like, come visit. Most people don't. So like people actually really appreciate it if you come to visit them, because they know like you're a friend and you want to come see them. So that means that like you don't need to feel like, you need to be polite, obviously, but you don't need to feel guilty. There's a big hurdle, like, oh man, I can't believe I'm planning this trip, like I'm going to be hitting these people's houses, they're all going to be giving me free accommodation, who am I, sort of thing. But then you realize that no, actually, like I'm going to catch up with, a cool friend. They're going to see me, and it's like they were so stoked to have me around, and that just like made it all so much better. And it's a bit of a superpower when you don't have to pay for transport, you don't have to pay for accommodation. Then suddenly you can go traveling for weeks, and like, you're not paying anything. And it's really awesome. And there's a bunch of strategies with hitchhiking, which I'm happy to go into if you want. But that's kind of like the history.
Go ahead. Why not? Yeah.
Okay. Well, you put me on the spot here. I should have prepped. But basically, there's a bit of an art to hitchhiking. I'm tempted to say science, but I didn't really do any hypothesis testing or having control groups and stuff. Actually, but there is a bit of science to it, because you're getting a lot of repetitions, right? So you're getting like
Strategical,
basically
right?
you have, yeah, you have, it's strategic for sure. Like you've got, you know, this constant stream of cars at different rates that are going past, and you have to somehow just convince one of them to get you to go farther. So that's the first step, is like take any ride you can get. And I'm sure you can make lots of metaphors out of this if you'd like going forward. But a lot of people, you know, when they first start hitchhiking, they're like, oh, I'm going all the way to this city over here, so I need like a ride there. So I'm going to sit here all morning until I get one. But actually, you just need a ride to get you like 2 streets down the road. Because if you get 2 streets down the road, you get past a couple more intersections, and then suddenly one of the cars coming out of those intersections is going all the way to Auckland, sort of thing. Like,
Yeah,
that's a huge thing. So if you can take those little steps, you'll do really well. Another one is just like the basics of having a good place for them to pull over. Like there's a lot of psychology of like what makes a driver want to think that this is a safe thing to do, you know, because a lot of people, and one of the things I love most about hitchhiking is that it makes you realize that there are so many good people in the world, you know, because hitchhiking is one of those like truly altruistic acts, you know, like I'm driving to a place, I don't need to like pick up anyone, you know, like, but it's not really going to hurt me, you know, it's going to take 30 seconds out of my day to stop and 30 seconds more to stop, you know, again up the front. And so but it's like, do I take the time? Because there's nobody's going to like, I'm not going to get to my work and then someone's going to ask me, hey, did you pick up those hitchhikers today? You know, like it's completely, you know, a personal altruistic thing. So you get that sort of thing when it's when you're hitchhiking, the only people that ever pick you up are these like super open-minded, super kind people who are just from all walks of life, and you get to have a chat with them. The other thing is a lot of them are like kind of bored, like they do lots of, you know, driving and stuff. So that's the one that's not so altruistic, is they just want a good conversation fodder. But that just brings more benefit, because then it's just, you know, like this person you've never met from different walk of life to you, you know, it's probably a completely different perspective on life. You know, you meet crazy people, met some conspiracy theorists one time, but mostly you just meet like super lovely people who are just doing things and they just want to help you out. So it's like, how can you help them out? How can you make it safe? You know, you don't want to stand on some, you know, busy highway. Actually, you can't stand on motorways. That's illegal to stand on motorways, and you wouldn't want to anyway because they're going so fast. But most of the places in New Zealand, you know, are highways. If you want to get to a place that has a big, you know, a big berm for them to pull off completely off the road, and you want to get to a place that's really long, so that like they have to have a look at you, you know, because if you're just driving and you see them and then, oh, I'm too far past them, you know, very few people do a U-turn. I've had a few people, you know, especially because I've been going for years and stuff. You do have some people that are like, oh, I saw you and I went like 3 blocks down and then I did a U-turn because I was like, oh, I felt so bad. And those people are super cool. Like, love those people. But most people, they'll just drive past because, oh, I missed it. But if you have them like, you know, if you give them 100 meters of leeway so they can see you, they can get a big look at your body, they can see your smile, your open body language, that sort of stuff, then you can, like, they'll have plenty of time to pull over. Then they have to almost actively decide, oh, I'm deciding to drive past this person. And that's a huge one. We always had the rule of wearing a white shirt, or at least something very similar to it. There's the old adage, it's hard to keep a white shirt clean. And I think there's, you know, some perception that, you know, like hitchhikers and things can be people that, you know, are a bit dirty, a bit smelly or something. So you can easily signal against that by doing something like just wearing a white shirt, which shows like, look, man, if I was, you know, dirty and muddy and smelly, like you'd be able to see it on the shirt, and you can't. So therefore, you know, I'm pretty clean. Same thing, always clean shaven, you know, not wearing a hat over the head or sunglasses, you know, big smile. And then bringing a Yui Boom or some other speaker or whatever, and then just traveling with a mate and just sticking it on your bags. Oh, that's the other thing. You bring tramping bags or hiking bags, because people know that like travelers bringing big bags and stuff, they're going to differences. People know those people are safe because they've come from some other spot. They're not, you know, it's not just some guy who uses this in his local area and things. So you put your speaker down on your big tramping bags, which you're using to get around the country, and you have a bit of a boogie on the side of the road. And you're just in the middle of nowhere, you know, you don't know where, and you're just having fun. And oftentimes you get picked up so quickly, you get annoyed. Like you got to like the second song and you're like, this is a jam, and you're having a dance with your best mate on the side of the road, and you know, someone's picked you up already because they see you're having fun, and then you seem like a fun person to be with. So yeah, those sort of things. I'll probably come up with a few more, but there's a lot of learnings that you do as you go along, and you realize like, what is it that influences? Because all you have to do is shift it by like 10%, and then suddenly you've got it right within 5 minutes.
That's so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. And what I loved about that, because the key thing it's just human nature, right? If somebody sees, if you don't give anyone any doubt to pick you up, so wearing a white shirt, not clean shaven, because the minute you see someone that's a bit dirty or unshaven or unkempt, human psychology goes, oh, this is not there's too much doubt here, or there's 1% doubt not gonna pick this person up. So human psychology is pretty crazy. It also goes back to how you judge people, right? When you're walking in the street and everyone is judging, and everyone says, "Oh, don't be judgmental." We're all judging. It's part of human psyche. It's not good or bad. It's just part of our lives. And I guess when you're doing what you're doing with hitchhiking, you're just working that. Let me give them more chances of saying yes than no to me.
100%. Yeah. And it's not to say that you shouldn't pick up hitchhikers that aren't following those characteristics.
Yep.
I try to pick up hitchhikers whenever I see them, no matter what they look like, because I just know like it feels so good to give back. So many people have given me a ride, and I just I'm stoked to do it. But yeah, like as much as you can tweak, like you say.
Yeah, and I guess the more you do these things, the more you're likely to give back, because you realize, hey, actually, I've done this before, and if somebody drove past me, I'd feel a bit shitty if they're in the middle of nowhere. And I guess it's the same like when you're driving and a car's trying to come through, and you give them way. It costs you nothing to give someone way to come into, if it's traffic, and because you've done that before and you've been waiting, in a car, try to get out in the car on the road. No one's giving you way, so just giving someone a bit of way costs you nothing, right? So yeah, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes for you. But with your hitchhiking, I'm going to fast forward to the summer here. So this summer was a very exciting summer for you, and I'm wondering whether all your skills with hitchhiking actually helped you get through what was happening on your journey. So for our listeners, do you want to tell them what your summer was basically all about? So you were off to go South America to have an adventure, and things changed quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure they did. It was pretty fun. So yeah, I finished working on some stuff for my honors over the last year, and we kind of planned a trip with my sister, which is a bit of a dream trip, just her and I, to hi Mel, if you're listening, to go to South America. Specifically, we planned Peru and Argentina, and kind of tacked on Uruguay as well for the same thing. So that was pretty epic. So we both grew up in Chile for a bit. We both technically been to Peru and Argentina, but a very long time ago. We'd only been to like small parts of them. And we really just wanted to have a big adventure. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And then while we were there, probably the best way to tell the story is just me waking up. So we get there at like 3 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m. in the morning. We're staying with this family friend in Cusco. Not in Cusco, in Lima. And coastal city capital of Peru. And I kind of sleep in till like noon, and I wake up. And in those movies when like the character's waking up and he hears like the radio in the background, and it's like somebody's invaded somewhere, there's some political crisis happening, and it's like, the preview aforementioned to what's going to come into the story. So this is what was happening to me in Spanish, of course. I'm listening and I'm hearing some movie going on in the background. It's like in Spanish, the president has, declared martial law and closed Congress, and that people are calling this, unaccountable to democracy and horrible. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of strange. And then I realized the TV's not on, and it's actually the radio playing out of the maid's phone. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And as I listened more, I realized it sounds a bit more like the news than a movie. And it turns out that this is what's happened, that the Peruvian president had just decided to close Congress right before they were about to impeach him and kick him out. And I was like, whoa, this seems pretty radical. And I look out the window and I realized that in this major city of like 18 million people or something, you might want to fact check me on that, but it's a lot more than New Zealand just in one city. There's this huge street, and in one direction it's just completely empty, and in the other direction it's completely cars going back to back to back, and in the other direction everyone trying to get out of the city. I'm like, well, that looks a bit strange. And I'm like, oh, it's rush hour, I guess that's what's happening. And it turns out it's the middle of the day. And I'm like, oh, that's a bit strange. And then we get a call from the people that we're meant to be staying with. He's gone to work, and he's like, no te preocupes, esto pasa todo el tiempo. Don't worry, this happens all the time. And I'm like, it's just going to be a small thing, business as usual tomorrow. And I'm like, what? This is crazy. You can't just have this massive thing. Everyone's reacting, like you can't tell me it's going to be normal tomorrow. But then the crazy thing was the president got arrested by his own bodyguards, and the country moved on as normal. And I thought, wow, like that's not a thing that happens, the places where I live these days. But I guess that's how it goes. And I think the next night, I went clubbing at like some backpackers, and people talked about it and stuff, but it was a bit more like it was the news for the day, not like some major political crisis or the president getting arrested. So yeah, that was the start of the story, and nothing really happened for like a week after that until we started trying to like travel down into some of the southern regions. And we ended up like a bunch of the roads got closed, but then we managed to get through on a bus. Some people had to trek around about like 4 hours in the desert to try and get around some of these protests and stuff, but we managed to get right through by just hopping on some local buses and stuff. And we ended up in Huacachina, which is kind of this perfect oasis looking desert place where you can go like sand skiing and sand snowboarding and some of that stuff. It was a beautiful place, but as we were starting to do some of the sand skiing, we're talking with some of the, because we speak Spanish, we're talking with some of the guides and things, they're all telling us, oh, it's going to start happening, come Monday morning, 5 a.m. It's all going to happen. And we're like, what's going to happen? The protests, they're going to shut all the roads. And we're like, what? And they're like, yeah, they're going to shut all the roads. Who knows when they'll open them? It's going to be big. And we're like, uh-oh. So we were with some other tourists. There were these 3 German girls, and they were like, we're going to try to get to Cusco. It's like Saturday at this point. We were going to stay on. It was Sunday at this point, but it was in the evening. It was like, we're going to catch a bus to Cusco. It's like an 18-hour ride, and we're going to make it through before they shut everything. And so we hop on and we go through. A bunch of people tell us, it's a bit risky, but it also seems like we might get trapped in the place we are, which is a less touristy friendly place than where we want to get to in Cusco, and we want to see Machu Picchu and everything. So we get on there. It's an 18-hour bus ride. You kind of have the nights on. We go up over the 4,000-meter mountains. My sister, she gets like really big altitude sickness, and then I'm just kind of hanging out. I was mostly all right, which was great. And then we get to this like small village, in through the mountains. The bus is driving through, 1-lane street, and then suddenly you start to see like a bit of smoke coming up, farther ahead, and then you realize that like it's driving up, that like there's a big sign being set up across the road with like a bunch of tires being burned in the street, and they're blocking the road. And they're blocking the road completely. They're piling more things in. The whole community's coming, and not only are they blocking the road there, they're blocking the road of the next 10K, and they're blocking the road of the next 10K, and they're blocking the road basically every 10K at every little village stop for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. And we've just got our bus right into the middle of it. And yeah, we ended up getting stuck there for a bit. And I think my sister made a video about it, which I'm happy to do. We ended up getting stuck there for a few days. And at some point, all the Peruvians started leaving. And we realized that, no one knows how long we're going to be here. We need to walk out. So, because that's what everyone else was doing. And they let us through. The protesters, they were quite violent against vehicles that tried to go past, but they didn't care about people. And there were other parts of the country where people are violent. They burned down the airplane tower for the 3rd biggest airport in the whole country.
Oh, wow.
In Arequipa, that got shut down. There were other places where the police had clashes and it was a bit more violent, but the place we were, it's really nice. There wasn't any clashes. People were really friendly. They were actually having like a big boil up for all the people that were like stuck in the cars, but they were there for days. There was definitely tensions, but there was nobody had gone to violence, except for a little bit at night when people got really drunk. But we tried to stay away from that sort of thing. But yeah, we ended up just walking straight through like the mountains and getting to the next town, which we're also trapped in, but at least there was hostels there that we could stay at. And we ended up getting trapped there for a few days and couldn't get out. And this was well before like CNN or anyone had got onto the news, or people from, Cusco were talking about being trapped in Aguascalientes and those things. So yeah, pretty exciting story. There's more to it, but I won't drone on so much.
Yeah. What is that like for your family over here? Because you're over here doing, obviously, this is an adventure, but also an adventure that has got a bit of risk to it because you have no control over what's going on here. You're just taking each day, each moment as it comes. And your parents are here in New Zealand going, damn, what's going on here?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so my parents have done quite a bit of travel themselves,
Yes.
and they know, that you can't control all the situations, and they've gotten themselves in a couple of hairy situations as well, and they know how to do it. But they're still your parents. They're quite good at providing advice, knowing what to do about the right things. a lot of it was keeping up morale as well.
Yeah.
Like there were some times people got like a bit stressed about things. But honestly, with myself, like it was a bit stressful, but there was never a point that I like felt physically unsafe like immediately. You know, there was definitely like I have no control over this overall situation, but definitely like there were a couple of people there that didn't speak Spanish, and some Israeli tourists, and like that would have panicked me. You know, like if you can't communicate with anything, but because I was able to constantly ask, and that doesn't mean that I was getting true information. You know, it's one of the problems I think with particularly Peruvian men. You know, they love, you know, they're very passionate, but they're kind of conflict averse as well. They don't like saying things, they don't know the things, so that they, you know, or at least this was the case with the bus drivers. You know, they just want everything. Don't worry, not the preocupes, you know, it'll be fine. We'll leave by noon. We'll leave by tomorrow morning. We'll leave, you know, you can't actually get a straight understanding of what's actually going on, but at least I could speak. And I think there was an element to which like we have food. We were actually running out of food later on, and then actually in the next city we got to, they shut down all the shops, so we had to like knock on some windows and stuff. But I spoke Spanish, and there were people there that were willing to help. And this is the thing again with like the hitchhiking, with realizing there are good people everywhere. Like there's always people that are willing to help, and because you can communicate with them, there was always an extent to which like I overall feel safe. You know, people weren't pulling guns on people, and you could be all right with that, and you just kind of moved on. You know, with the strategies, and you moved on and did what you could, and then eventually the things open up, and I think it was 5 days later that we ended up going out to the road, and our bus came through, and we hopped back on it, and we made it to Cusco just in time for a big national lockdown to try and prevent some of the things.
Oh, crazy. Did you get to Machu Picchu then, or did you?
Yes, I ended up getting to Machu Picchu. It was really last minute because they shut all the roads down, and the way that I wanted to get to it, they chose all the train tracks and stuff. But I managed to talk into which ended up being a scam. But I ended up getting on a scam, but then still going through, and at every point in the way, just being like, "Hey, like I paid for this thing, you know, like what's going on?" And it turns out that it was. Yeah, it's a really long story, but it turns out there was this like drunk alcoholic guy who used to work for a tourist agency and like had all their books, and like sometimes like sold people like lower fares so that he could pay for his alcoholism. Which is the guy I ran into to buy my ticket. But I ended up taking this local route, which went a long way around, and then walking along the train tracks to get to Machu Picchu. It was like a 10K walk through the jungle, because that's the thing I didn't realize about Machu Picchu. You think it's up in the mountains, and it is, but it's also in the jungle, which is so different than the rest of Peru, which is like desert. And like it's one of those things that, you know, completely met and exceeded expectations. You know, the expectations are, you know, right up there, and it's still like smashed it out of there. Amazing time.
Yeah, what a crazy story. And I guess, you know, what would have helped you was, number one, the fact you communicate, because language is pretty powerful. So even in a state of no power, you have the power of communication. Whether it's the truth or not, it's still you've got power. And I guess also your experience with hitchhiking. You know, if this is your first rodeo out there, it'll be very, very different. But as you said before, from your experience with hitchhiking, you know, most of the world is good. Most people are good, and there's maybe some that are bad, but for a particular reason. No one is outwardly bad because they want to be bad. Something in their life has happened. So I guess, you know, that does help. And to contrast that dramatically, what is that like? What is that like compared to doing your honors? Because you have your honors project, which is, we'll talk about in a second, to this year. So what is that like? Because it's two different worlds altogether. One is
there's lots of worlds.
Exactly,
it's only one world, but there's a whole lot of worlds in this one planet.
That's right, exactly. Crazy, yeah. So what is that like for you? What is your honors project on? And, you know, as you reflect on that, I guess.
Yeah, so my honors project was looking at the motivations of doctors who work in both the public and the private systems at the same time. So that's called dual practice. And it's actually like around 40% of all doctors, just a bit over, so of all senior doctors, consultants we're talking about, not the junior doctors, have this kind of setup in New Zealand. But most of the laws are kind of written, well, most of them just completely ignore the private sector, but when they do acknowledge the private sector and things like that, they tend to kind of see them as very separate, when in the reality on the ground is they kind of do both. And so we're keen to look at a bit of like from the personal angle why they do that. So that was really cool, and I learned a lot during the honors. Definitely have a lot of reflections on that. But I guess the honors year also provided an opportunity to try out a few other things as well. So I was able to do a bit of travel during the year, which was great. But particularly one of the coolest things we did was some friends and I helped set up Effective Altruism in Eden, which is the local branch of this global and social movement, which is trying to use evidence and reason to try to do the most good. And yeah, we can definitely talk more to that as well at some point.
Yeah, that's very cool. Before we talk about that, because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Let's talk about why you did honors here, because for our listeners out there,
for sure.
people think, oh, I do health first year, I do my first year of thing, then I get into med school, happy days, hunky dory, I finish after 5 years. But a lot of people that I know,
6, but yeah,
yeah, six, sorry, yeah, 5+1. But a lot of people I know, and I've been really lucky to take that break for a lot of reasons. I say the word break, but it's not actually a break. But they stop and they do something else. What is your motivation to do that there? Because the perception is, oh, 6 years. What am I going to be so old when I finish up? And I'm adding an extra year. What is going on here?
Yeah, and I think it's important to clarify on that sort of thing. I think a lot of people don't really know the schedule going in with the whole medicine thing, because it's either 1 or 3 years, depending on whether you do health sci or post grad or potentially super grad. It could be longer. Then you've got 2 years of ELM, which is kind of a lot more like health sci, just doing more stuff like that. Then you've got 2 years of ALM, which is what I'm doing at the moment, and then you have 1 year of TI. This point, none of this time you're being paid. You get a bit of a scholarship in TI, but you're paying about 17 grand a year each of this time, which I worked out to be about $100 a day. And there's definitely days where you're like, I'm not sure if that was entirely worth it. And also the government pays, the government pays like 3 or 4 times that as well. And then after that, you have house officer years, where you work in like 60+ hour weeks for at least 2 years, but most people do 3 or potentially more, depending on how you become a senior house officer, depending on how you like which specialty you're trying to go to, what entrances you're able to get in, and different setups. And then at some point you'll do some kind of specialty training, if you decide to, which a lot of people do. And that could include specializing in general practice, which is one of the shorter ones. I think it's about 3 years, more on top of that. But most of the programs are around about 5 years, and some of them are a bit longer, like 6 or 7, depending on some of like neurosurgery. You get about 5 years of working and then you retire or something like that. That's an exaggeration, but it feels like that to some things. So yeah, all up, you're looking at about 14 or 15 years of training. Is like the kind of standard route, assuming you don't take other different things. So putting a year onto that, I think a lot of people do just focus on the next step, which is a very healthy thing to do, in terms of like just needing to think about your next steps, but also like focusing on the bigger picture where you want to be at, was definitely a consideration for me. And I realized that I wanted to try out some of this academia. I wanted to give the opportunity to try out some other things that are outside. And yeah, the honors year definitely gave that. On top of that, from a pure practicality standpoint, the Otago Medical School pays for all your fees. So a lot of people pay like 10 grand, or I don't know, Tane, what are you paying to do your honors?
11.5 grand, I think.
There, he's paying 11.5 grand to do his honors, and the Otago Medical School pays for that. So that's nice. It's not quite the same because we don't actually have any classes or anything. They just like pay for the ability for us to do a course, and then they mark it. And there are some classes and things, but it's very informal. So it's not quite the same thing, but they do pay for that. And also they give you, well, again, this isn't guaranteed, but pretty much everyone I know has gotten some scholarship from the Otago Medical School or some other place. So it's normally the default one is 5 grand, and there's some that are above that. And I managed to get the biggest one, which was quite nice, and padded a little bit to the financial treading water of that sort of thing. So yeah, basically I got the opportunity to work on a project, which would like let me learn this new skill, get involved in this new world that I wouldn't have otherwise, and live in a way that I thought was pretty cool. And I thought it was definitely worth taking the year to go do that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone, and academia definitely has its pros and cons, but I would definitely consider it.
Yeah, I like that, because I love how you mentioned that, because I think Tane was questioning this as you're finishing up his 3rd year. He was like, what does it do next? And you decided on honors. Do you want to talk about that, Tane? How did you decide? Because you were thinking teaching, you were thinking go to the workforce or honors. And
I think ultimately what made me take that decision was because I thought I still had enough to offer down here while studying, and I thought also, I could go into academia now and have that taste without going, into masters or thinking about PhD. So it gives me that 1 year to look at it without, fully committing 2 years. But also if I think about teaching, I think it's a route that I could take later in life, and it's not going to be a detriment if I don't take it now. And, I think I'm glad that I made this decision, because I look at, the coaching I'm doing and working in after school care. And so those have been different avenues that I've been able to do some of those things that I would do in teaching, but without, having to take that 1 year course. So it's obviously a personal decision. And I have plenty of mates who have, gone more into looking at strength and conditioning or going out into the workforce. But I think for me, I wanted to see what academia was like, and then I can make that decision around, do I carry on, or do I then go into the workforce, or how I navigate that.
Yeah, totally. And it's all about choices, right? Making a choice, and there's no right or wrong. It's just a decision you make, and you go, right, cool. What is this? Everything is going to give you a learning, and you take the learnings and you do what you want the learnings. Gavin, let's go back to your is it altruism to Dunedin? Tell us more about that. There.
It's effective altruism. Yeah, effective altruism is Dunedin. Yeah. So have you heard of Peter Singer or Will McCaskill?
Yes, I have. Yeah. Yes.
Both of them?
But I've heard of Peter. I've heard of Peter, but not
Peter Singer.
No.
Okay, yeah. Well, so you're so for Tane and the other people, Peter Singer is pretty famous for some of his arguments about how to think about doing good in the world, and how to think about the transferableness about certain ways that you can do good. So one of his classic things is a drowning child problem, which is that if you had someone if you saw a child drowning in the pond, and you were in an expensive suit, say like a $5,000 suit, and you could go in there and it would ruin your suit, but you could go save the child, well, then you'd obviously do that. You jump in. I imagine everyone would. But what if it was across the country border that you had to cross? And you'd still probably say yes. But what if it was a bit farther away, and you had to yell at someone else to do it, but it still would have the same cost? Well, you still say yes. And you can keep following this kind of chain of logic to realize that there are some bits of value that you have that you value less than that of a life, and therefore there is sorry, I'm just receiving a text message here, but I'll close that. But therefore, you might want to think about how you spend money, and how that might go farther overseas or in some other places. And there's a lot to talk about on that sort of way, and kind of what level that people like to do with that sort of thing, because you can definitely go too far and just get yourself worked in this big circle. But then it's that kind of applying logical thinking and evidence and reasoning to trying to make the world a better place in a way that has an expanded moral circle. But then also just understanding that it's actually really difficult to do things that make the world better, and then to actually see that they have done so, and that often things that sound like great ideas don't actually end up doing the most good. So the first chapter in the book Doing Good Better by Will McCaskill talks about play pumps. I'm not sure if you guys heard about play pumps. So you'll know that many countries in the world aren't as fortunate as New Zealand. They don't have running water that's that does things as well. And one of the best things you can do, one of the things that with medicine, when you look back at the things that have saved a lot of lives, it's sanitation and water that has gone a huge way. And so you have all these pumps that are being done, but people have to spend a lot of time pumping up and down, using a lot of energy. So one person had this brilliant idea, what if we use the fact that kids love to play on things and love to spin around on a circle, and use that energy to pump the water out. And he did all these calculations. They got some designs, and they found out look at that, we could do it. They implemented it. He went around the world. They got some major grants. They won out on grant competitions and implemented these things. But at no point did they do consultation with the people on the ground, and at no point did they do well, they did a bit of pilot testing, but they did major pilot testing, major implementation. And they had all these big advertisements. They understood how it worked. So they thought they understood how it worked. But then actually, when they put them on the ground, they found that these things didn't actually get used as much, because unlike a spinning circle that you get on a playground that's like a completely free velocity, when you're pumping water out of the ground, you're constantly applying a force against another force. So you have to constantly push on the thing in order for it to keep spinning. So it doesn't spin very, very well. So all the kids just get tired and bored and stop playing on them. But of course, you still need to get the water out. So you have all of these, often women, but all of these people who just basically have to like kind of undignifyingly push themselves around in a circle in a way that's much less efficient, because they're trying to, they're just not like just doing a pump up and down. And so they ended up spending significantly more money and creating something that was just significantly not as good as the other thing. And when it comes to like ways you can do good in the world, there seems to be, like, on evaluation, like a few different areas which just do disproportionately more good in this sort of evaluation. And there seems to be ways you can think about that than other ways, which are still like doing great, but maybe less so, and that we should potentially think about this. And so these are quite to some people, these are just very standard ideas. It's like, oh yeah, we should think about this. To other people, it's like pretty striking. Like the idea of like evaluating charities, like before GiveWell existed, was very fringe, but now it's like, yeah, of course, like if you only have a small amount of money to give, of course you might think about like how you can save the most lives doing it. And so that it's kind of grown out of this, and from this has kind of been this kind of international community of people who will like talk about these ideas and will try to help coordinate. And because everyone's kind of focusing on the same goal of like making the world better and trying to figure out in different ways, they've kind of developed a lot of these really cool norms of discussion, a lot of open-mindedness, a lot of being able to challenge ideas, challenge our own ideas. It's one of the most classic, probably the most classic effective altruist thing, is to like take a critique of effective altruism and spend too long debating about it. No one in effective altruism agrees with everything with effective altruism, like, but that's the whole point. It's very welcomed. It's the culture there. And yeah, so you can get there's some very cool people who have got a very cool culture and have gone through and just doing amazing things. And I guess there's an element of that if there's a lot of students and things listening. There's a website called 80,000 hours. So that's based on the estimate that you have about 80,000 hours in your career. And it's designed specifically about thinking about if you want to think about doing good in the world, what are some things like that you might think about while doing so. And it's got a whole bunch of blogs. It's amazing, like as a resource in terms of like, it's just done a whole lot of thinking about if you're interested in, helping prevent people in third world countries having like preventative illnesses, like what are the ways you should think about, getting into that and doing that. If you're, worried about other things like potentially large global pandemics and stuff, what is different ways you could potentially go and look at that. If you're interested in international collaboration because you think, as long as countries are all working together and not seeing themselves as enemies, like who are the experts that are currently working in that field and how can they help you like get through to that area. So yeah, definitely worth checking out, and it's been very inspiring to be a part of. And we helped, Daniel and Merlin are still running the club down there. They're the big drivers of it. And if you guys are interested, if you're into Dunedin, there's Effective Altruism Dunedin still on Facebook. And I'm currently looking for someone else to help me set up a club in Christchurch. There already is one in Christchurch, but it's not really student focused. And I know with these sort of things, you kind of need a teammate. So currently that's on the rocks.
Awesome. I mean, that's such a great initiative. I mean, I didn't know about it, so it's really awesome to hear about that. And for our listeners out there, wherever you are in the world, and if you're in Dunedin, go and check it out, because I definitely will check it out and have a look at that there. Because it's so interesting, because people want to do good, but sometimes by the act of doing something good, you're actually making things worse. And I know this because I grew up in Zimbabwe, as you know, and my family works in the healthcare field. And I remember one year, so my dad would go and get these donors and they would come and drop stuff off. And one year there was a Danish company that just dropped up all the stuff here. They just came and gave all the stuff here. But and which is amazing stuff, but the problem is it was using the wrong voltage or the wrong thing. So you couldn't actually use it. It was great, but they were like, oh, everyone can have the stuff here. So in the books, they tick the box to go, hey, we've been using, but it wouldn't work in Africa because it didn't have the right voltage, something didn't work. So again, the idea is good, but the implementation, without asking people on the ground, people that are actually going to use it, it's always the biggest flaw that we have, right? If we don't ask people that are actually going to do the stuff, are they actually going to use it? Which is interesting across third world countries. You see this happening where you have all these amazing ideas come through, but They just lie there. So that's pretty awesome. I'll check it out. I'll definitely check it out. And I might, after this podcast, I'll give you a person that I think you might want to have a chat to in Christchurch in a second.
Oh, cool.
We've been speaking for almost an hour and a bit, Gavin, and you've got some amazing stories, and I'm sure we could do another podcast if you're keen to do so. What I'd love to do
maybe
is
sometime in a few months' time or something.
yeah, totally in a year's time maybe. Our podcast is called Bastards of Knowledge, and every episode we ask our guests to share one piece of knowledge they'd love to share to our listeners. I mean, you've shared tons in this podcast, but if there's one piece of knowledge you'd like to put in someone's basket of knowledge, what would that be?
Basket of knowledge. That that the categories are made for man and not man for the categories. It's a bit of a philosophical point, but that I think when you go about grouping things, you can have a very specific category of the stuff, and you can hold it something. If you're grouping things like fish, you might say that a whale is not a fish. Just use a completely random example, because of all these genetic things and stuff like that. But actually, if you go to someone else in some other context, they have a different word for fish, and they didn't mean like the genetic predisposition of the thing. What they actually meant was like the things with tails that swim in the sea that I need a boat to go see, and that like the other things on land are the things on land. And these categories are made for people, not people for the categories. And that you should try to understand how other people are seeing that thing, and be willing to draw lines in freaky ways if it makes things work out.
That is really powerful, and I love it because it segues back to what we said right at the start about how we were the inner and the outer, and the outer the inner. If you think about the census, you've got to tick these boxes because you are defined by one culture or one identity. So again, I love that because
sure.
you can extrapolate to anything in life when it comes to ideas and categories. So that's a very beautiful learning. It is one of our deeper learnings. Sorry.
Yeah, I must give credit, by the way, that comes from a blog called Astro Codex 10, which used to be called Slate Star Codex, and there's a psychiatrist called Scott Alexander who wrote that, who I'm a big fan of. So it's not my thing. Must give credit.
It's not your thing, but hey, you shared it with us, which is fantastic. So sharing is caring, and like I said, that information is powerful. Tane, any last words for Gavin?
No, it's just been awesome to hear your insights into the things that you're doing and the things you have been doing. Now, I like this idea about collaboration because I think, being in my honours project this year, I think that's what it all comes down to, really. I think, so many academics go into their field and they have so much knowledge, but, this knowledge isn't powerful if you don't collaborate with the groups or the people you're trying to impact. So I think, the most important thing is that you collaborate with the groups you actually want to see outcomes for. And by doing that, hopefully, you still might not get it right, but you're going to be a lot closer than if you didn't collaborate with them in the first place.
100%. Things are hard and there's unknown unknowns, but you can still do stuff and make great things happen.
Exactly. And hey, it's easy to be a good person. If you're a good person, things should change for you, right? What I took away from your messaging, some fantastic stuff there. But the big thing for me was, hey, inherently people are good if you give them a chance. And unfortunately, the way the world and the media, I don't watch the news, but the way the media portrays the world is everyone is out to get you. Everyone is out to get you and everyone is bad. I think it's a good reminder that actually inherently people are good. Gavin, fantastic. I really appreciate you jumping on. I like I said, I really love what you do, and I've learned something new today about the effective altruism, which I'll have a look at. Thank you for coming on.
80,000 hours is the website I recommend students go to, 80,000hours.org.
80,000 hours at all. We'll check it into the podcast notes as well. Gavin, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. For listeners out there, hopefully you found something useful to in today's podcast. If you haven't, listen again because you've definitely missed out on some amazing things. As always, as you go forth and do what you need to do, please remember to put something into your basket of knowledge. Till next time, bye everybody.
Thank you for listening to Baskets of Knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that you found something useful to put into your basket of knowledge. And as we said before, remember to put something little into your baskets of knowledge every week. And as always, feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast. Thanks, everybody. Bye.